A lot of people with AIDS in those days were seen as terminal. They were not going to get better. They were only going to infect other people, and therefore they needed to be isolated. There were talks about putting people on an island, quarantines, everything else. It was really horrendous, very scary times when any gay man feared that at any moment a public health officer or a cop would grab him off the streets and say, "You have AIDS, we're taking you away." It was really scary times. In 1985, I got a call from a nurse at a hospital in Lewiston, Idaho. I was in Spokane. Lewiston is probably about 2 hours away driving. It was a kid with pneumocystis pneumonia, went into the hospital. She saw some Kaposi's sarcoma, skin cancer that many people in those days got with AIDS. It was a defining illness that said you had AIDS. He had been beaten up by his brothers, by his father, and they were going to come back into the hospital and kill him. The nurse called me because she heard about the Spokane AIDS Network, so we drove down there. He had broken ribs that had not been treated. They didn't want to treat him down there because he had AIDS. We finally got him fixed up and everything else. He went back to his parents' house. We talked him out of it, and he committed suicide 2 days later. Well, at least they said it was suicide. I was never convinced. But yeah, it was really hard seeing everything that this guy went through, all the beatings that he went through. It was horrible. And nobody knew what caused AIDS in those days. So nurses, they didn't know if it was airborne or what. So nurses wouldn't come in and help treat patients. I was an angry radical, so I would go in and feed people. We had public health forums at the high school to educate people about AIDS. And I had my windshield of my car bashed out because people didn't want that. Also, people actually said to me, "Don't educate those faggots. We want them to die. So don't educate them on how they can stay alive." People were really angry at organizations especially AIDS organizations in rural towns. It was a little different in, AIDS Project LA or the San Francisco AIDS Foundation. But in Spokane, we were assaulted. We had a post office box. We didn't have a storefront. Word of mouth is how you got our attention. So, yeah, we had a phone. And when we helped create the Spokane AIDS Network, we got people from the county who were the Medicaid people and everything else. We got one of those people on our board. So we did help facilitate Medicaid. To get on Medicare, you need to be disabled for 2 years in order to get Medicare. What we did was, because people were dying and there was no cure for AIDS at that time, we got the Medicare people to do what's called Social Security, a presumptive disability. Basically, it said that this guy's probably going to die in 6 months. So therefore, we presume that he's disabled. Therefore, we will get him on Medicare. Therefore, his medical bills, blah, 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 are covered. And then on state disability and other sort of programs. So that was a big advance for people with AIDS, was getting that presumptive disability through Social Security Administration. It took a lot of congressmen and other people, advocacy, but it only took about 1.5 years of effort, and it finally changed. I remember there was this one guy, he got better, came time for him to go home, and the transport people, nobody would transport him because all the nurses had told everybody and everywhere that he had AIDS. It was gossip, common gossip. There was no confidentiality in those days. People broke it all the time because they felt, that this guy was going to kill the community. So therefore, I have an obligation to tell the community that this AIDS patient is in the community. Anyway, so I thought, screw it. So I put him in my car, which I wasn't supposed to do, policy, but to drive him home. As we drove home, he was in an apartment building. It was sort of a U-shaped type of thing. And there, as we pulled up in the middle courtyard, they were throwing all of his furniture into a bonfire, and they were burning all of his furniture from his apartment. All of his possessions were being burned. And they saw him and saw us, and my windshield was smashed for a second time. A rock came through the windshield as we sped off. So, yeah. You weren't just fired. You couldn't stay in your own apartment. You were evicted. You were locked out. I mean, with no legal recourse. And then there was also the situations in those days. One guy who had left home when he was 15, parents kicked him out, whatever, came to, Spokane with his lover. They had a happy life. They lived together. They bought everything together. He dies. And the other guy who's living, he's there, and his parents come in and they kick him out because he has no legal right. He's not married, no legal right to any of the property, can't produce receipts. The police said, well, this faggot has AIDS too, kick him out. And I don't know how many people, without exaggerating, I can think of at least during that time when I was at the hospital, at least 10 to 20 people that I personally helped who had been kicked out literally on the street in the middle of winter with snow in Spokane, literally kicked out with a court order. And not just the parents it was a court order. Marshal came, kicked them out. No warning, wasn't allowed to take anything. And that's what happened before there was gay marriage or civil unions. We had no legal rights. We could live together and build a life together for 20, 30 years. It all was taken away in a few minutes.